He who can see the shadows has power in the light.
Minasan konnichiwa, this is Matt Okahara from the Matsumoto Castle Gun Corps, and today we're going to look at law enforcement in samurai Japan. Having served a number of years in law enforcement myself, this is a subject that I'm actually genuinely interested in. And just for a little bit of clarification, we shall be looking at law enforcement after unification had been achieved. Broadly speaking, policing the population fell into two categories: policing the samurai and policing the commoners. As two distinct parts of the same population, there were different procedures for those who fell foul of the law. At the top of society were the samurai. They were for the most part a military caste of noble lineage. Being fully integrated into a feudal system, any indiscretions and any illegal activity would need to be justified. This meant that law enforcement for the samurai caste was generally kept in-house. The samurai lord, known as daimyo, or his appointed staff, would gather information about the alleged offence or indiscretion, and then once the investigation had been completed, they would deal with it as they saw fit. The Japanese feudal system also allowed for the appointment of magistrates. These samurai themselves were often investigators as well as judges. Known as the metsuke, these samurai were at the top of the organised justice system. Owing to the amount of responsibility and power that they had, they were often drawn from powerful families. But they didn't work independently or alone. Assistant magistrates, known as yoriki, along with patrolling samurai, known as doshin, made up the criminal justice system. The yoriki and doshin were often drawn from local areas. For example, in the Matsumoto domain, whereas the magistrate or metsuke may have come from a powerful clan in another part of Japan, his assistant magistrate and patrolling samurai, who acted essentially as police officers, would be drawn from the local area. This was essential to this kind of law enforcement. It meant that the local population would become familiar with the samurai that were on patrol. Not only did this help keep the population in check, but it also meant that the population knew who to turn to when things were going wrong. They couldn't very well just turn up to the magistrate, but being familiar with the metsuke staff, who were a regular part of village and town life, it meant that offences could be reported and dealt with quickly. But the doshin, or patrolling samurai, had a tough job. In many cases, this was seen as employment of last resort for the samurai. Dealing with the trials and tribulations of the common population was seen as one of the minor responsibilities of the samurai caste. Once the country had been unified, diplomatic and governmental positions were seen as the best. After this, military positions were highly sought after. Following this, there were regulatory positions in local government. And finally, there were the doshin. Essentially, they were the beat cops of samurai Japan. But that being said, they were a member of the samurai caste and wore two swords. Not only this, but they also carried a jute, this being a fork-shaped weapon that the samurai could use as a truncheon or blocking device. The metsuke, yoriki and doshin, however, were not just law enforcement officers. The samurai were the ruling class of Japan, and as such they were not only responsible for the good order and conduct of the population, but also the protection of the population. And whilst afforded many privileges, they were also burdened with many responsibilities. A samurai had to keep his own affairs in order. For example, a samurai with many tenants, whilst maintaining law in the local town, could also be expected to provide arms and training for the peasants and workers that lived in his own holdings. However, after the Meiji Restoration, this system of law enforcement changed. new politics and new ideas created a professional police force. So that is law enforcement in Samurai Japan. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and also let us know about your thoughts about law enforcement during the samurai era.
Right, I'm just going to jump on to the end of Matthew's video here, and I'm going to do the unshameable thing. So the shameable thing of saying about this samurai arms, armament, and tactics of warfare. Get a copy of this. The reason being is Matthew's video is superb, and what it does is get everyone away from the heroic samurai in the, you know, the wind sort of idea, and bring us back to reality of the samurai and actually how society worked. What's great is Metsuge, Yoriki and Doshin are all in army listings, so a lot of the things Matthew was saying, like magistrates, probably I think he's referring to Bugyo there, and which are like military commanders. But then when, as he says, when we got the unification and everything's fine, what do these people do? So we know that Doshin and Yoriki and there's also Yokome, which are, I think, hidden or secretive watchers. Metsuge, they're all positions in the army. And they're all army positions. Well, that's a little bit of a weird one, that, because they're all samurai positions and the samurai go to war because they're military. It's really difficult to divide. It's really difficult to divide the samurai from civil life. And it's a hard thing to do because the samurai are the military, but at the same time the samurai go through phases of being more civilian but not military, i.e. they live in civilian life, but they're still military personnel with military systems and policing systems. And words like military and policing are English words that are difficult to translate over. They're not impossible, don't get me wrong, there's words for them, but what I mean is the idea that the samurai policed themselves and they policed the world at large. So imagine if the army and the police force were hereditary, put together in England or America, and they were literally 10% of the population, and they walked around within you in uniform. So every 10th person you saw was, like, you know, on average was somebody in some form of military. If it's the lowest of the low Ashigaru soldier all the way up to the lord, they are there in your society. They're not in a military base somewhere. They're not like away. They're walking around town in full regalia, uniform, sometimes with heraldry and spears in front of them. And you have to have a policing system. And this system that Matthew is talking about goes all the way back to the warring time. So even they have war crime tribunals, if you like. The samurai themselves would be like, right, you did that and that was wrong. I told you couldn't pillage at this time. I told you couldn't murder and rape, so you're getting killed. And you couldn't steal at this time, so, or you weren't on duty at this time. Off you go. You know, all of that is there. So it's a really good video by Matthew, that. And it shows you how the transition of military life into civilian life, but with a military caste system, which goes into a very bureaucratic, less military caste system, but, you know, holds on to its military past. So it struggles with actually keeping law and order. And in Japan, everybody says it's the Edo period is the period of peace, and we all use that term, but it was a period of dictatorship, in my opinion. But not so much that it was, you know, it allowed the expression of art, it allowed the expression of sexuality, it allowed lots of things, but literature. But it also curtailed a lot of it, and people were banished, executed for what they wrote. People who had, you know, the wrong ideas. Yamaga Soko, I think, was one of the great Ronins who wrote and was, I think, banished at one point and brought back to the capital, and all sorts went on. You'd have to go deeper into his and other people like him. And the idea is that, but still, it's a harsh criminal, you know, if you a criminal is stealing over a certain amount, executed. It's same was happening in England. And if you've got the wrong front to your house, they could rip it down and then make you rebuild it in the different type of tiles because you weren't right. Hairstyles were controlled, clothes were controlled, things were controlled, everything was controlled. So that's the type of thing we're looking out for. So thank you very much to Matthew for that video. Get yourself a copy of that, and I'll see you. Oh well, we'll see Matthew in his next video on my channel.